No one expected the 2025 season to end on a quiet note, but even the most loyal Formula One fans were caught off guard by what happened just 48 hours after the final race. Most people assumed the teams would be on flights home, celebrating or recovering, but instead, the paddock roared back to life at Yas Marina. This wasn't just another off-season test. Something unusual was in the air. There were new cars, new drivers, new technology, and one massive surprise that hinted at a very different future for Formula One. And if you saw the title, you already know, some unexpected events just changed everything about how the 2026 season might look. What made this test so strange wasn't one moment. It was the mix of stories happening all at once. You had 10 teams running 2 cars each, meaning 20 cars on track in a test that looked more like a mini Grand Prix. You had rookies and rising stars stepping into cars they may race full-time next year. And then, in the corner of the paddock, almost hiding in plain sight, one team quietly rolled out a car with technology we've never seen on track before. Not in real life, not in public, not with cameras pointed straight at it. When viewers realized what they were looking at, social media exploded. But before we get to that shock, the day began with something far more symbolic. Lando Norris, the brand new world champion, returned to the cockpit for the first time since winning the title. It wasn't a parade lap. It wasn't a victory tour. It was real testing, real work, and real data collection. Yet the moment he stepped out of the garage wearing a gold helmet, fans knew this wasn't going to be a normal test day. Lando ran his familiar number 4 one last time before switching to the number 1 plate next season, and it felt like the closing scene of a movie he spent years trying to finish. But this test wasn't about lap times. Not really. It was about the unknown. The FIA let teams run mule cars, modified 2025 machines designed to behave like the upcoming 2026 cars, which will have less downforce, different aero, and a whole new tyre philosophy. So while young drivers in full-power 2025 cars were setting fast laps left and right, the veterans were wrestling with slower, trickier machines built to preview the future. Still, nothing, and I mean nothing, caused more whispers than what Mercedes rolled onto the track. Their test car carried something hidden inside the rulebook for months. The first working piece of active aero for 2026. A moving front wing. Something we have never seen during live running in the modern era. And once that wing moved, the entire paddock realized the test wasn't about ending a season. It was about starting a new one. This is the test that revealed more than anyone expected. And this is where the story begins. The moment the engines fired up, it became clear this test wasn't just a slow warm down after a long season. Yas Marina felt busy, crowded, almost chaotic. 20 cars on track at once is rare even during a Grand Prix weekend. But seeing that many machines running mixed programs created a strange rhythm. Some drivers were pushing hard on soft tires. Others were cruising on long runs, barely touching the limits. And in the background, Pirelli engineers watched every corner like detectives trying to solve a puzzle. This is because half of the field wasn't testing for today. They were testing for 2026. To make the new tyre regulations work, Pirelli needs real-world data on how the future cars will move, slide, heat the tyres, and stress the compounds. But since the 2026 cars don't exist yet, teams used heavily modified machines nicknamed mule cars. They look like regular 2025 cars, but they behave completely differently. With smaller wings and higher ride heights, these mules lose a huge amount of downforce. They don't stick to the track the way modern F1 cars usually do. Through the corners, they move more. They shake more. They force drivers to fight the wheel instead of letting aerodynamics do the work. And that's why the lap times were so confusing. By the end of the day, the fastest time on the board came from Aston Martin's young driver Jack Crawford. Behind him were Paul Aron in the Alpine and Luke Browning in the Williams. Three names most people don't associate with headlines. Meanwhile, world champions like Lando Norris and Lewis Hamilton sat far down the order, looking almost slow on paper. But the truth was the complete opposite. The young drivers were using full 2,025 spec cars with maximum downforce. They were basically driving the fastest version of current F1 machinery. The experienced drivers, on the other hand, were in these awkward, low-grip mule cars that were never meant to set records. They were tools, not weapons. Still, even with the strange lap times, the paddock couldn't stop talking about one driver, Kimi Antonelli. The Mercedes Junior didn't just run laps. He ran the most laps, 157 in a single day. That's nearly 2 Grand Prix distances. And all of it was done with the team's experimental active aero front wing. Every time Antonelli hit the long straights, sensors were firing, data was flowing, and the Mercedes engineers were watching how the moving wing changed drag, balance, and speed. This wasn't a simple test. This was the first small taste of what Formula One will look like in 2026. But while Mercedes stole the technical spotlight, the test also became a showcase for the next generation. Drivers like Crawford, Aron, and Browning stepped into the spotlight with confidence. They didn't treat the day like an audition. They treated it like a statement. And even though the times didn't tell the whole story, their calm pace, smooth driving, and quick adaptation impressed team bosses up and down the pit lane. One test day won't define a career, but this one definitely changed the conversation. As the morning session blended into the afternoon, the test took on an entirely different tone. Up until lunchtime, most teams focused on predictable work: tyre evaluation, run programs, baseline measurements, the usual checklist. But after the break, new faces stepped into the cars, and the story of the day suddenly shifted toward the future of the grid. This wasn't just a test anymore. It became a preview of who might shape Formula One over the next decade. For Red Bull, all eyes were on Isaac Hadjar. It was the first time he officially drove for the senior team, and even though the lap times didn't matter, everyone wanted to see how he carried himself inside the garage. Red Bull doesn't put drivers in that seat unless they believe the potential is real. Hadjar didn't look nervous. He didn't look overwhelmed. He settled in quickly, spoke clearly with engineers, and handled the pressure like someone who understood the weight of the moment. It was the kind of quiet confidence the team loves. Meanwhile, down at Racing Bulls, another young talent made waves. Arvid Lindblad, who isn't even old enough to rent a car in some countries, climbed into an F1 machine for the first time as an official future race driver. Many rookies tense up on their debut day. To no one's surprise, Lindblad didn't. He kept his head down, focused on his lines, and soaked up every bit of information the engineers threw at him. For a team that often acts as a launchpad for elite talent, this was exactly what they wanted to see. McLaren also joined the youth showcase. Oscar Piastri jumped into the championship-winning car for the afternoon, taking over after Lando's final farewell session. While Piastri's program wasn't dramatic, it was important. McLaren needed data, and he delivered smooth, consistent laps that filled in the gaps left from the morning. Even Pato O'Ward got valuable time, continuing his development within the team's long-term plans. Ferrari, though, carried the most emotional storyline. Charles Leclerc handled the morning work, but attention shifted when Lewis Hamilton stepped in for his final run of the year. After a rough first season in red, Hamilton admitted he needed to disconnect for a while. This test, then, felt like a last chore before stepping into the quiet of winter. He didn't chase glory, he didn't chase headlines. He simply completed his program, climbed out, and ended a season he'd probably rather forget. And then there were the absences, because those said a lot too. Max Verstappen chose not to participate, joking that he'd done plenty for the year. Fernando Alonso and George Russell took the same path, preferring rest over more mileage. Their empty garages showed a different kind of preparation. Sometimes the smartest move is knowing when not to show up. With rookies rising, veterans stepping back, and teams experimenting with future technology, the test had turned into something no one expected. A turning point, hiding inside a single day of running. By the middle of the afternoon, the test had settled into its rhythm, until it didn't. In a single moment, the calm hum of cars circling Yas Marina snapped into chaos. Rio Haryanto's Haas suddenly spun under braking at turn 1, snapping sideways before sliding backwards into the barrier. The impact wasn't massive, but it was enough to rip the rear wing off and throw carbon fibre across the runoff area. Marshals threw the red flag, and for a few minutes the entire track fell silent. Teams crowded around their monitors, replaying the footage and trying to understand what went wrong. It was a reminder of something easy to forget. Mule cars behave differently. The lack of downforce makes them unpredictable, especially for drivers who only get a handful of laps in them. What looked like a normal braking zone turned into a trap that couldn't be saved. Haryanto was unhurt and even returned later in the day, but the moment exposed the very real challenges of the 2026 philosophy. Less aero means more movement. More movement means more mistakes. And more mistakes mean teams will need to rethink their entire approach to car control next season. But if Haryanto's crash was a warning, Esteban Ocon's day was a disaster. The Alpine driver completed only 4 laps before technical issues forced the team to shut down the car for good. 4 laps in an entire day of testing. When the garage door finally closed for the afternoon, the message was clear. Alpine's problems from 2025 had followed them into the postseason. The team that already suffered through one of the toughest years in its modern history now faced the worst outcome for a test: no data, no progress, and another winter full of questions. Ironically, the brightest performances came from the drivers with the least experience. Luke Browning delivered an impressive program for Williams, showing calm speed lap after lap. Paul Aaron, who ended the day second fastest overall, quietly turned heads with his smooth lines and clean feedback. These names might not dominate headlines now, but inside the paddock, engineers were taking notes. Tests like this can shift careers, open doors, or change how team bosses view their future lineups. Meanwhile, another storyline brewed at Alpine and Renault's power. This test marked one of the final times we will see a Renault engine run in Formula One. With the team preparing to move under Mercedes' power, it felt like the end of an era. The once powerful Renault program, responsible for multiple world championships, ended its final season ranked last in the constructors. Their postseason run almost symbolized that fall: slow, unreliable, and overshadowed by everyone else. As the sun began to lower over Yas Marina, the strange mix of chaos and possibility reached its peak. Crashes, failures, breakouts, and farewells had all unfolded in the span of a single afternoon. But the most important lesson of the day hadn't arrived yet. That part was still hiding inside the test data. Teams were quietly gathering. And once it surfaced, everything about 2026 suddenly made a lot more sense. As the final hour of running began, the test shifted from dramatic moments to something far more important: understanding what all this actually means. Because while fans were busy comparing lap times or reacting to highlight clips, the teams were focused on a completely different question. What does this data tell us about 2026? And in many ways, the answers hidden in the numbers were the real headline of the day. The biggest finding came from the mule cars. Drivers and engineers walked away with the same conclusion. The 2026 cars will feel nothing like the current ones. The lack of downforce changed everything about how the cars behaved. They slid more under load, struggled with slower corner entry, and reacted differently to throttle inputs. Even simple things like riding curbs or approaching bumps became more delicate. These weren't small adjustments, they were fundamental changes that will require new driving styles and new engineering solutions. Pirelli, meanwhile, gathered the first meaningful tyre data for the upcoming era. They need compounds that can handle lower downforce, different weight distribution, and more frequent load changes. The mule cars gave them exactly that. Every long run, every warm-up lap, every cool-down lap helped them build a database they'll use across the next 12 months. Without this test, the 2026 tyre development cycle would be almost impossible. But the day wasn't just about technology, it was also about people. Jack Crawford's name rose to the top of the timing sheets, and even though the context of his speed was unique, the message he sent was loud. Teams are always searching for the next breakout driver, someone who can handle pressure and adapt quickly. Crawford, Aaron and Browning showed they belong in the conversation. They didn't treat the test like a tour. They treated it like an invitation to the future. Another interesting takeaway came from the split approach between veterans and rookies. Drivers like Norris, Hamilton and Antonelli completed purposeful programs rather than chasing speed. It showed discipline. It showed trust between teams and drivers. Most importantly, it showed that the established names are fully locked into preparing for 2026, not chasing meaningless test day glory. And that brings us to the star of the technical world, Mercedes. Their active aero system didn't just work. It worked well enough for Antonelli to complete the highest mileage of anyone on track. This was the first public sign that Mercedes may be ahead in understanding the new rules. Movable wings could completely reshape how cars behave on straights and through corners. And Mercedes now has real-world data that other teams simply don't. By the time the test ended, the story was no longer about who was fastest. It was about who learned the most. And as the track lights flickered on, one thing became clear. This wasn't a post-season cooldown. It was the unofficial start of a new era. When the final minutes of the test ticked away, something subtle but important started to come into focus. This was the moment when teams stopped pretending the day was only about evaluation and openly showed their priorities for the next season. Every mechanic packing tools, every engineer reviewing temperature graphs, and every driver giving one last debrief said the same thing without using a single word. The race for 2026 has already begun. The clearest example came from how differently teams approached the day. Mercedes left Yas Marina with confidence they didn't have a few months ago. Between Antonelli's marathon mileage and the successful active aero runs, the entire garage seemed energized. They weren't celebrating or bragging, but you could feel a quiet belief in the direction they were heading. For a team that spent recent years fighting to recover its former dominance, this test felt like a spark, something that could grow into real momentum. McLaren, on the other hand, approached the day with the calm focus of a team that just delivered a championship. Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri didn't chase headlines. They collected data and delivered clean laps. Nothing flashy, nothing risky, just the work of a team that knows exactly where it stands. Norris's golden helmet became the emotional highlight, but behind the scenes, McLaren's engineers were already thinking about the changes required to defend the title under a brand new rulebook. Ferrari's situation was more complicated. For Leclerc, the test represented a simple extension of a long year. For Hamilton, it felt like closure. His body language said everything. He was ready for the winter, ready for time away, ready to reset. Ferrari needs to regroup after a difficult season, and this test reminded them how much work lies ahead. The data from the mule car was useful, but the bigger challenge is rebuilding energy and direction inside the team. Further down the paddock, the midfield revealed its own storylines. Williams left the test feeling optimistic. With Browning showing speed and confidence and with a car that behaved better than expected, they walked away with hope for next season. Alpine, however, faced the opposite outcome. A single day with almost no laps meant an off-season filled with uncertainty. The change in engine supplier added another layer of pressure. Their transformation could pay off, but right now it feels like a leap into the unknown. And then there's Red Bull. Even without Verstappen, the team's quiet confidence was obvious. They didn't need a flashy test to feel ready. They needed to evaluate Hadjar, gather baseline data, and wrap up a year that had its share of frustration. Watching from the outside, you could sense they're already thinking far beyond 2025. For them, the next big challenge isn't defending a title. It's adapting to a rulebook that might level the playing field. As each team gradually packed their crates and shut their garage doors, the atmosphere shifted again. No one was celebrating. No one was sulking. Instead, the paddock felt like a workshop closing for the night, with everyone already planning what they'll build tomorrow. The postseason test wasn't about the season that ended. It was about the one that hasn't begun yet. When the checkered flag finally waved over the Yas Marina circuit, it didn't mark the end of a test day. It marked the beginning of something much bigger. Teams rolled their cars back into the garages. Mechanics shut down their laptops, and engineers carefully packed away boxes of data drives. Drives that will shape how the entire sport evolves between now and the first race of 2026. The atmosphere wasn't tired. It wasn't celebratory. It was focused. This was the moment everyone realized the real off-season wasn't a break at all. It was the starting line of a completely new era. The unexpected events of the day, crashes, rookie breakthroughs, technical surprises, and quiet emotional moments, painted a picture of a sport standing at the edge of massive change. Mercedes' active aero wasn't just a clever experiment. It was the first physical proof that 2026 will force teams to reinvent everything they know about car design. Pirelli's mule car data wasn't just preparation. It was the foundation of how future races will play out. Even the lap times, confusing as they were, reminded everyone that comparing the old and new worlds of F1 is about to get a lot more complicated. The drivers felt that shift too. Norris saying goodbye to the car that made him a world champion. Piastri stepping forward as his partner for the next chapter. Antonelli quietly building the kind of mileage that could launch a remarkable rookie season. Hamilton closing the door on a season that tested him more than he expected. Young talents like Crawford, Aaron, and Browning proving they belong in the conversation for future seats. Each story added another brushstroke to the bigger picture. Formula One is moving in a direction no one can fully predict yet, and that's exactly what makes it exciting. Even the absences were telling. Verstappen, Alonso, Russell, drivers who decided their work was already done, showed that preparation isn't always about more laps. Sometimes it's about choosing the right moment to step back. That contrast is part of what made this test so unusual. Half the field was pushing toward the future, while others were already studying it from a distance. And that brings us back to the heart of the title. Unexpected events shaped this test. But the real surprise was how much it revealed. More than anyone expected, more than the schedule promised, and more than a typical post-season day should ever uncover. As the sun set on Yas Marina, the track fell quiet. The grandstands emptied. The floodlights dimmed. But the work, that was just beginning. Engineers will spend the winter turning today's numbers into tomorrow's solutions. Teams will rethink strategies, rethink designs, and rethink their entire identity for the 2026 rulebook. Drivers will rest, reset, and return with new expectations. The 2025 season may be over, but the future of Formula One just showed its face for the first time. And if this test was any indication, the next era is going to be faster, stranger, and far more unpredictable than anyone imagined.